Greetings and welcome to another impressions video here at Words About Games, and today we're going to be looking at Katana Zero. Katana Zero is a neo-noir action platformer that puts players in the role of Subject Zero, a war veteran turned assassin who is given assignments via his psychiatrist. Aside from being Zero's handler, he also psychoanalyzes his recurring nightmares and mental state, as well as supplying him with a drug called Chronos, which allows Zero to slow down time or even predict the future. Katana Zero is pure adrenaline, a concoction of fast-paced thrills and incredibly well-designed set-pieces, and it's one of the slickest action games I've played all year. Combat is one-hit kills, for both you and any non-boss enemies you encounter. As Zero, you're equipped with your katana that can attack in 8 directions, as well as having the ability to pick up certain objects in the environments and use them as projectile weapons, starting out with statue busts or plant pots before upgrading to things like molotovs or smoke grenades, which are devastating but also serve secondary functions in certain situations. Zero also has an ace in the hole thanks to the aforementioned Chronos. Side effects include being able to hold down the left trigger to slow down time, allowing you to execute dodges or time your katana strikes to deflect bullets back at enemies. It also lets you rewind time should you die. The conceit being that any failed attempt at a level is written off as using your precognitive abilities to plan your assault, rather than you having to simply restart a checkpoint when your brains get smeared all over the wall. It's a neat touch, and once you've cleared a level, you're shown the whole scene back again in real time, which is both badass and also subverted quite wonderfully at certain points later in the game. It's also worth noting that you don't need to use slow-mo for any of this, and can instead play the entire game at normal speed. And let me tell you, pulling off a series of quick kills or successful bullet deflections without using it is a rush few games can match. It's a fantastic mechanic in an already fantastic action game though, giving you a slight edge given the fragile nature of the protagonist and just how lightning fast the game actually is. Slow-mo is tied to a cooldown meter, meaning it's not an infinite resource and you need to plan your movements and attacks quite carefully to ensure you're going to make it from one side of the level to another without being cleaved in half or blown away. What this all means in practice is that each of Katana Zero's levels feels more like puzzles that need to be solved rather than traditional action platforming levels. There are a few different enemy types, each with their own weapons and attack patterns that you'll need to learn, such as swordsmen who you'll need to dodge behind to avoid having them deflect your attacks, for example. Figuring out the composition of enemies that lie before you and the best way to get around to killing them all quickly becomes a really intricate affair of forward thinking and pattern memorization, giving Katana Zero's combat a lot more depth than you might otherwise get from other fast-paced action platformers. Putting together a plan and quickly executing it is immensely satisfying as you slice through your enemies, dodging their attacks and deflecting bullets back at them. I can't say enough about how brilliant it all feels in the moment-to-moment. There are a few quirks that can drag you out of those moments, however. The biggest issue I found while playing was that sometimes the enemy AI would behave a bit too unpredictably. A big part of figuring out the best way through a level, at least for me, was trial and error. I'd die a few times figuring out the layout, what enemies were ahead of me, and what the most efficient way of dispatching them was. Sometimes, however, they didn't react the same way twice. In an early level, for example, my first move was to pick up a plant pot, bash a door down, quickly throw the plant pot at the first enemy, and then enter slow-mo to deflect a bullet back at the second enemy. I did this a couple of times until I had the rhythm and timing down on this move and experimented with the rest of the level. What I found, however, was that the gunshot would alert another enemy further away, and sometimes it wouldn't, which would throw my rhythm off and usually result in my death as this unexpected third bad guy would blast me from above. Usually from off-screen, which is another minor recurring problem I had with Katana Zero's combat that happened a bit more frequently than I was comfortable with. Regardless of my getting hung up on certain levels due to this, I was always compelled to keep going thanks to how satisfying the combat otherwise was to play. But also because the story Katana Zero is telling is really engaging. I don't want to dive too deeply into it because it's definitely something that should be experienced with as little foreknowledge as possible, but I'm utterly in love with Katana Zero's storytelling style. While the narrative isn't especially groundbreaking at all, the way it's told is really novel. It's a fairly standard neo-noir sci-fi story, but the way in which Askisoft tells that story is brilliant, particularly how the main character's drug-fueled time powers are used in its telling. Katana Zero also features a really neat dialogue system that changes your dialogue options depending on when in the conversation you decide to speak up, unlocking more choices the longer you listen to a character talk. I also want to give a special shout out to the music in the game, which was composed by a few different artists and is one of my favourite soundtracks of the year so far. No matter what's happening on the screen, the music was a perfect fit, and at the beginning of each level as Zero put on his headphones, I couldn't wait to hear whatever the next track was. If you're a fan of pulse-pounding synthwave soundtracks in your video games, it's available on Spotify, and I highly recommend you check it out. Katana Zero is a brilliant action game, and one I'm glad I went back to check out while I had the chance, as I'm definitely kicking myself for being a few months late to the party. The slick, fast-paced action is amongst the most satisfying 2D combat I've experienced all year. Heck, maybe even in the past few years, to be honest. Despite some minor annoyances with the enemy AI, I absolutely fell in love with finding the best way to slice and dice and deflect my way through each of the game's levels. Coupled with a thumping soundtrack and a really engaging story told in a unique way, Katana Zero is a game you don't want to miss out on. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, please leave us a comment, like, or subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We've got tons of awesome videos coming every week, including review impressions, indie game of the week, debate-driven top 5 lists, video essays, and our weekly podcast where we discuss games, gaming culture, and the games industry. We also stream 3 times a week at twitch.tv/wordsaboutgames. But most importantly, have a fantastic day.